One of these engines left a trail of deferred maintenance costs hiding beneath perfectly normal operation. Another looked almost untouched at 100,000 miles. And the third, the one most riders never seriously consider, came closer to winning this test than anyone expected. I'm the Wise Rider, and I've got 20 years of experience riding and wrenching on all three of these configurations across multiple bikes and multiple climates. We tracked real-world data across V-twin, inline 4, and inline triple engines through 100,000 miles of documented ownership, and let the numbers speak. Let's get into it. The V-twin is the sound of motorcycling. Harley-Davidson built a century-long empire on it. Ducati turned it into an art form. The Indian Scout, the Ducati Monster, the Harley Sportster S. These are the bikes that made people fall in love with riding. The low-end torque, the soundtrack, the character, it's all real. And going into this test, the V-twin was the sentimental favorite. At 100,000 miles, the data told a more complicated story. The 45-degree V-twin configuration, the Harley architecture, runs its rear cylinder directly in the airflow shadow of the front. At highway speeds, thermal management is adequate. In slow traffic, the rear cylinder runs significantly hotter. Over 100,000 miles, that uneven heat cycling produces measurable wear differences between the front and rear cylinders, a pattern documented consistently across high-mileage Harley forums and independent mechanic reports. Head gasket monitoring becomes a real part of ownership above 60,000 miles on air-cooled configurations. And it's not just the air-cooled V-twins that carry this thermal burden. Liquid-cooled V-twin configurations manage cylinder temperatures more evenly, but the V layout still creates service access challenges that inline configurations don't share. Reaching the rear spark plug on a V-twin often means removing exhaust components or engine covers. On some models, that's a 30-minute job. On others, it's a half day. At 100,000 miles, every service interval adds up, not just in parts cost, but in labor hours that a more accessible engine layout simply doesn't require. Primary chain wear is the other recurring theme. The V-twin's primary drive, the chain connecting the engine to the gearbox, operates in an oil bath, but 100,000 miles of torque pulses takes a toll. Primary chain replacement runs $400 to $800 in parts and labor depending on the shop. Not catastrophic in isolation, but it arrives alongside other mileage-driven costs, and those costs compound. The V-twin at 100,000 miles is not a failed engine. It's a characterful engine that has been working hard in a specific way, and the wear picture reflects that. What surprises owners is not any single cost. It's what happens when several costs show up at the same mileage. The reputation says bulletproof. The data says manageable, but only if you've budgeted for it. The next engine has the highest ceiling of any configuration in this test. It also has the most documented long-distance reliability data of any motorcycle engine type on the planet. The Inline 4. The Inline 4 is the engine that changed motorcycling. Honda's CB750 in 1969 proved that 4 cylinders could be reliable, accessible, and transformative. The Kawasaki ZX series, the Honda CBR, the Suzuki GSX-R, the Yamaha R1, 50 years of refinement built on that foundation. Going into this test, the Inline 4 was the data favorite. At 100,000 miles, it largely justified that reputation. Cam chain tensioner wear is the most consistently documented high-mileage issue across inline 4 configurations. The cam chain keeps valve timing synchronized, and at 100,000 miles of high RPM operation, tensioner wear produces a cold start rattle that experienced mechanics recognize immediately. Addressing it runs $300 to $600 at a shop depending on model access. Caught early, it's a straightforward service item. Ignored, it becomes an engine rebuild. Valve clearance is the other mileage checkpoint. Inline 4 engines typically require valve clearance inspection every 15,000 to 26,000 miles, depending on manufacturer. At 100,000 miles, that's 4 to 6 valve checks, each running $200 to $400 in labor. It's not unexpected maintenance. It is maintenance that budget calculations need to include from day one. The riders who are caught off guard by high-mileage inline 4 costs are almost always the ones who factored in the purchase price and ignored the service schedule. What the Inline 4 delivers in exchange is a wear profile that is remarkably even across all 4 cylinders. Liquid cooling eliminates the thermal asymmetry that the air-cooled V-twin lives with, and a parts ecosystem that no other configuration can match. Independent mechanics worldwide know these engines. Parts are globally available at independent suppliers, not just authorized dealers. Service is accessible without routing through a specialist, without waiting on overseas shipments, and without proprietary diagnostic tools locking you out of your own engine. At 100,000 miles, the Inline 4 on our test showed the most balanced wear picture of the three configurations. Not flawless, but manageable, predictable, and cheaper to address than the cost waiting behind the V-twin at the same mileage. The Inline 4 took the lead. The margin, though, was not what the reputation suggested it would be. Before we get to the engine that genuinely surprised us, if you're riding one of these configurations right now and you have a high mileage story, drop it in the comments. Real ownership data from real riders is worth more than any spec sheet. And if the Wise Rider is helping you make smarter decisions on two wheels, hit subscribe. What's coming next is the part nobody saw coming. The Inline Triple. The Inline Triple is the engine most riders never seriously consider. It doesn't have the cultural weight of the V-twin or the racing heritage of the Inline 4. Triumph and Yamaha are the two manufacturers building triples at scale. The Speed Triple, the Street Triple, the MT-09, the Tenere 700. A smaller community of owners, less forum data, less visibility. Going into this test, the Triple was the afterthought. At 100,000 miles, it nearly stole the entire test. Here's the mechanism. A 3-cylinder engine fires at perfectly even 240-degree intervals. That firing sequence, combined with a balance shaft on most modern implementations, produces vibration characteristics that are measurably smoother than either the V-twin or the Inline 4 at equivalent displacement. Less vibration over 100,000 miles means less fatigue on engine mounts, less micro-movement at gasket surfaces, and less stress on ancillary components. The wear picture at high mileage reflects that in ways the dyno sheet and the spec page simply don't capture. Cam chain tensioner wear appears on the Triple too. It's documented on Triumph Speed Triples and MT-09s, typically emerging around 25,000 to 40,000 miles. The important distinction is that the Triple's cam chain service, when addressed proactively with a manual tensioner upgrade, running approximately $50 to $100 in parts, extends reliably to six-figure mileage. Triumph Speed. Triple owners with 100,000 kilometers on original powertrains are not rare in long-distance touring communities. They're the rule, not the exception, among riders who follow the service schedule. The Triple's mid-range power delivery is the other factor that doesn't show up in spec sheets but shows up in wear data. V-twin owners who bought for low-end torque are often riding at higher throttle percentages to maintain highway pace. Inline 4 owners are working through the RPM range to access the power band. Triple owners are frequently cruising in the middle of the rev range where the engine is making peak efficiency. Less stress per mile, over 100,000 miles, adds up in the wear data in ways that genuinely surprised us. There's also the practical reality of the Triple's size advantage. 3 cylinders displace more than a twin, but package more compactly than a 4. That compactness means better engine access for routine servicing, valve checks, oil changes, filter replacements, without the rear cylinder access penalty of the V-twin, or the complexity of pulling apart a 4-cylinder valve train. Routine service costs on high-mileage triples run consistently lower than either configuration at equivalent mileage. Nobody talks about this. The data does. Nobody expected the Triple to finish this close to first. The wear data at 100,000 miles was meaningfully better than the V-twin, and within a narrower margin of the Inline 4 than anyone anticipated. Here's what 100,000 miles actually showed across all three. The V-twin carries the most accumulated maintenance cost at this mileage. Thermal asymmetry, primary chain wear, service access complexity. None of them catastrophic alone, all of them expensive together. It's not an unreliable engine. It's a high-character engine that charges you for that character over time. The Inline 4 wins this test. Balanced wear profile, global parts availability, the deepest independent mechanic network of any configuration, and a service history that 50 years of owner data has made entirely predictable. The reputation is earned. The Inline Triple came closer to winning than anyone expected. The even firing interval, the mid-range efficiency, the compact service access, and the documented longevity of properly maintained speed triples and MT-09s produced a 100,000-mile wear picture that was the single most surprising finding of this test. If outright long-term reliability is the only metric, the Inline 4 wins. If you're measuring reliability per dollar of total ownership cost, factoring in parts access, service complexity, and the wear data we found at 100,000 miles, the Triple may be the most underrated engine configuration in motorcycling right now. And that might be the most important thing we found. Bottom line, do the research before you buy. Know what your engine costs to run at 100,000 miles, not just what it costs at mile zero. That's what the Wise Rider is here for. Subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.